My paper today is on a village that happens to be mine as well. So, and Maher's, the authors, Sibt al-Meduni, and how this history is presented in the work by Maher, and the work has been translated into English as the Ghosts of the Vestibule, and the Arabic title of it is أشباح السقيفة, with all the connotations, of course, associated with Saqifah in our culture, in our history, as you all know. Certainly, I will start with very general thoughts about fiction, about how space is important in fiction, and how cities tend to be important not only in fiction but also in myth. I guess each writer has his own or her own favorite space or village or city. These are most often used for whatever fictional or allegorical sometimes reasons or functions. They do not tend to be most often real experiential cities, but they can be also like phantasmal cities, fantastic ones, unreal ones, as for some poets like T.S. Eliot. And I guess there are lots of artificiality which is associated with the city, and especially the modern city. I would like also to say a few things about how the city emerged as a central entity or body, so to speak, in myth in ancient times, how the cities were associated not only with, most often associated with, nation building. We think of what we call, nation states in ancient myth and ancient history. We think of cities as, fundamental bodies within the nation. Thebes, Athens, Tyre, Troy, all these are examples, and most often the myth of the foundation of the city is associated with a figure. The figure could be mythic, of course, as it could be a real. So there is always this kind of, what we call blending myth with fact, fiction with fact, and myth with history. Thebes, I don't know if you know something about the foundation of Thebes in Greek mythology, and I think it's Mesopotamian, so it's a Middle Eastern myth. Originally, Thebes were founded by Cadmus, who went to search for his sister who has been abducted by Zeus. So that's part of the stories which tend to be associated with fiction and myth. Alexandria with Alexander the Great. There are so many examples in ancient history, in ancient myth, and how the city is associated with with nation building. I think with modernity, things have changed radically. With industrialism, the city expands and acquires much more importance. It's almost like a new phenomenon that gave rise to what we call the urban novel. So when we talk about the city, and I think this is part also of our discussion, when we talk about the city, is most often we tend to think of it to think of it in modern terms, in relation to the modern history, because the city is a recent phenomenon, and where it is associated with a sense of dystopianism. This is a new sort of idea that we tend to attach to the city. Arab cities, of course, I think now we might sort of think of hyper-real Arab cities. If you think of the Gulf, like in Dubai or lots of other places, in the competition between all these cities, just to flourish their power and to flourish their extravagance. We tend now maybe to think of cities as completely different manifestations, something as organically associated, I would say, with the question of power and money. The quest is at once inexorable, but also it is irreversible. Once the quest starts, it cannot go backward. Once the quest starts, as I said, in the meanders of the city, and here I'd like to quote Italo Calvino in his Invisible City. He says, "It knows only departures, not returns." The protagonist never comes out the same person. This is the process of change and evolution and development. Maher Abderrahmane's novel, The Ghosts of the Vestibule, published in 2024, falls into line with this modern tradition in fiction. In this paper, I am particularly interested in the significance and signification of the city in the Arab imagination. So I see it within this, theme of the workshop. But before that, I would like to say a few words about the author. I think maybe that's almost something I have to do. So Maher Abderrahmane is a Tunisian journalist and fiction writer. He was presenter and editor-in-chief in the Tunisian RTT, and he later joined NBC in London. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
He has so far published 4 fictional works. Abderrahmane belongs to that generation, became so sort of prolific, I would say, after the revolution. So he published so far 4, but I'm sure there are some other projects in their way. His debut novel is titled Ain Ahmam, that was published in 2020. The second one is The Hummingbird and the Acacia Tree, that was published in 2023, and it won the 2024 award for Best Arabic Literary Work Translated into Spanish. The novel has been translated into French and published also by Harmattan very recently in France. The Ghost of the Vestibule, which is our novel for this talk, was published in 2024 and was awarded the prestigious National Bashir Khraif Literary Prize for 2025. The Girl of the Oval Tomb, that's I think his latest novel. It has been translated into French. And in addition to fiction, Abderrahmane has published several books on the media and its crisis in Tunisia. The author is married and has 2 children, and his wife is here today. And he lives with his family, of course, between Tunis and London and Tunis, and I'm sure so many other cities as well. So, The Ghost of the Vestibule, well, the title gives us the impression that maybe it has some kind of, a connection with the Gothic or the fantastical. No, that's not the case. It doesn't really belong to this genre. It is rather steeped in realism. It is the story of Mukhtar, that's the main protagonist in the story, who one day finds himself compelled to embark on a journey for self-knowledge by searching into the opaque history of his paternal family in the village of Aqsibat al-Maduni, in the Sahel region of Tunisia. All of a sudden, he finds himself that he has to, to go on this journey. The journey moves through different cities, namely Monastir, Sousse, and Tunis, but Aqsibat al-Maduni remains the core of its geographical sphere, the epicenter of its actions and tensions. It is the most important spatial setting for the novel. He is the son of Sheikh Mukhtar, because he has the same name as his father. And when we say Sheikh, of course, it has that resonance of being a local mayor, as we say. And he's and he is the son from a second wife of the Sheikh, who lives in Sousse. The Sheikh has first wife who lives in Aqsibat, and he married this, young, wonderful, beautiful, woman. And in order to avoid, the kind of, the scandal within the village, so he lodged her in Sousse. But he neglected her, and he left her in utter poverty. So Mukhtar finds himself torn between his hate of his absent father and his inner fascination with his power and charisma. The tension is subtle, of course, lived at the unconscious level of the narrator's psyche. The narrative, almost self-consciously, rests on Freudian psychoanalysis sometimes. And the author seems, correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes I think he has that sort of subtle way of showing us that this son has some kind of a Freudian, an Oedipal complex. Because he's very much infatuated with his mother, but he has a visceral hate for his father. But a bit of fascination as well. His father's, power, charisma, and aura within the village. So all this is done, of course, in a very subtle way. So Abderrahmane's The Girl of the Oval Tomb, his latest, novel, I think treats something that is close to that. But he seems to be playing on 2 different kind of, complexes. This one is rather between the mother in the opal, and the girl of oval tomb is rather mother-daughter, but in the ghost is between father and son. But yes, I think that's basically the idea. So it's that complexity between, within the family relations. Qasibat al-Maduni stands as the geographical and psychic locus of the narrator's Oedipal complex. In the village, the narrator goes through a process of self-analysis in light of his vexed relationship with his absent and now deceased father. In a mirror scene, which is an important scene, I think, in the novel, in a mirror scene that takes place in the ancestral house, in the father's dark bedroom, which stands like a spatial symbol, I think, of the id in the Freudian sense, as a subconscious locus for repressed desires and tensions. The narrator's confrontation with his image transforms into a confrontation with his haunting father, the ghost of his father. Because when he sees the mirror, it's very much like the first time he sees his father in front of me, and actually, I think the author, he does it deliberately. He blurs the boundary. Let me read this quote for you. Very well, this is the son addressing his father. Very well, answer me, Sheikh Mukhtar. This is very much like a tough sort of confrontation. For I see your spectre facing me in this mirror. You are dead, but I feel your spirit haunting me like a ghost. I speak to you frankly, O mirror, you who reflect an image, whether it's mine or that of Sheikh Mukhtar. I now feel no remorse for having fulfilled my father's wish to die. You see the subtle Freudian sort of subtext is there. I didn't kill him, O mirror. That's the feeling of guilt. But I'm going to tell you how it happened actually. That scene of whether killing or not killing the father. I mean, it's up. I think the author leaves it for the reader just to have his or her own sort of conclusion about that. He began to kill himself in front of me. Tell me the truth, O father. Right? He sees his image. It's not the father. For here I am calling you father. For the first time he calls his father a father, because at the beginning of the novel he doesn't call him as a father. He calls him a stranger for him, because he'd never seen him before. He's seen him a couple of times, and the father's complete sort of absent, neglectful, father. So was that what you wanted by gripping my hand? This sends us, to a scene that is at the exordium, at the beginning of the novel, where the son goes to see his father in the hospital, and the father went bankrupt because of corruption. That it's terrible life, moral corruption, economic corruption, everything, financial everything. So the father, according to the story, has tried many times to kill himself, to commit suicide, but he couldn't. Even in committing suicide, he fails. So he begs his son. The father is in the bed. He begs his son to untie him, because the father is tied to the bed because the doctors didn't want him to do anything himself. And the son, when he saw that begging sort of look on his father's eye, he untied him. And the father, of course, basically committed suicide by taking off all the drains and everything, and the oxygen mask and everything. So the son doesn't know whether he killed or not killed his father, because in the Oedipal complex it's the son who kills the father, as in Oedipus, the myth. So at first the village of Qasibat Maduni stands as a space of denial for Mukhtar. He enters a village that is both alienated and alienating for him. It is synonymous with a repressed family and psychic history. An absent father, a clandestine marriage, and rejected filiation. It is lived as a geography of rejection and denial. So here I've got a quote that sums up this idea. As soon as the first time when the son visits the town, Qasibat al-Maduni, and this is very graphic, by the way. I mean, I'm sure that maybe correct me if I'm wrong. It has a kind of sort of topographical description of the village. I come from a village, so I know that some of the scenes are really very accurate, geographically speaking. So this is what the son says. I knew this coastal road from visiting a friend in the village of Sayeda. Sayeda is a very close. Samira taught for some years in Qasib al-Medina, so she knows the topography and the cartography of the place. So so he visited Sayeda always. Sayeda is on the way from Sus to Qsiba is on the way from Sus to Sayeda. But this son refuses to visit the village. I knew this coastal road from visiting a friend in the village of Sayeda, but I had never set foot in Qsibat al-Meduni, even though it was only 10 kilometers from the faculty where I had studied in monastery. From Sus, he studied in monastery, which is very close. I knew my father was from this village, but I had always feared what I might find there, as I felt like a stranger, despite my roots being planted in this soil. So this is the kind of relationship between father and son, as you see it. And Abderrahmane, I think, gives a topographic description of the village here of Qsibat al-Meduni. It is a village perched on a hill. That's the description in the fiction, in the work of fiction, but also this is the description of Qsibat in real life. It is a city upon a hill that cannot be hidden. I think this is Jesus who said it. It is a visible city. It stands as beacon of light and enlightenment as the story goes on. The author describes Qsibat al-Meduni in astonishing cartographic accuracy. Part of the experience is no doubt autobiographical, I guess. There is some kind of, association of maybe childhood, memories of the village. Right, and part of it, of course, is mythopoetic. Part of it is fictionalized. Part of it is aesthetic, of course, because this is the nature of fiction in general. So the village is seen as a temporality rather than a geographical space. This is what you feel when you read The Ghost of the Ghost of Vestibule. It is a temporal space in which the protagonist goes through a process of biographical enlightenment and self-discovery, however daunting and painful the experience proves. The village not only opens Mukhtar's eyes onto the reality of his ancestral history through a meander of narratives recounted by the villagers, in which the narrator most often finds himself more confused than enlightened, and therefore he has to cross-check them for veracity. So each persona within the village has his or her own perception of things, and more specifically of historical events there. So the narrator has to go through some sort of a decipherment of all these narratives in order to reach a certain historical accuracy about the village, but more specifically about the family history. As such, the village works at once as a site of self-knowledge and a stage for self-advancement, professionally and politically. And this is emphasized, I think, in the novel. In it, the narrator is nominated delegate, which is a political status higher than his father's sheikhdo. This is already some form of a victory over the father. The son scores something against the father in terms of professional and power status. From delegate, then, the narrator is promoted to governor of Syriana, governor of Zawan, and finally as deputy secretary general of the Destour party in the capital, in Tunis. So this is a professional promotion which is at two levels: geographical and personal, of course, and geographical in post-independence Tunisia. It moves from village to city, from rurality to urbanity. So Qsibat al-Meduni is also seen as a site of overlapping stories and histories, a microcosm of a country that pursues its destiny from pre-colonial times through colonial times, post-colonial and post-revolutionary turmoil and violence. All these historical periods are mentioned, are included in the narrative. So here I would like also to say something about how the village is presented to us as a palimpsest. In the Freudian sense, it would be like a mystic's pad. It's made of layers and layers of text, layers and layers of Okay. So a city. Yeah, how much like that? 5 minutes. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh, that was pretty. Calvino, he took. Okay. So Calvino talks about the city streets as if they were written pages. So this is within the same idea of, the palimpsest. A city moves in time. It follows the ebb and flow, so to speak, of history. So it's not a purely geographical site, but most of it is associated with history. I see it as more as a historical phenomenon than a geographical phenomenon, because within the geography you see the history of, the time. So the city is first and foremost, I think, is a historical site, as I said this. So let's move on. Likewise, so Occipital Meduni is depicted as a microspace of historical, political, and social transformation. You see all these in Occipital Meduni. In its space, the author complains narratives of myth and history. The traumas of historical and political violence are narrated in the form of recollected memories and stories recounted by different personae and voices, as well as in the form of facts gleaned from history books, the combination of both myth or mythopoetics and historical facts. You find this part of the narrative in The Ghost of the Vestibule. In the novel, historical mythopoetics rests on the central status of the local saint. The saint is central in the village, for whom the village calls its toponym, by the way. Meduni is a reference to the saint, the name of the saint. Not only as a founding myth, the one who founded the village, because that's part of the mythopoetics of the historical mythopoetics of the village, but also as an enduring influence on the daily life of villagers, perhaps until today, I would say. In such a portraiture, the historical blends with the anecdotal, the factual with the mythic, and the rational with the superstitious. The local saint is sought for blessings. He is addressed in times of adversity. He saved the community from historical and political violence, and yet punishes them if they do not keep their promises to give lahbus, or dare to demolish, his, sacred well for whatever, project, municipal or whatever. So these are, some kind of, local myths that we have about, the sanctity of the saint. Excuse the tautology of Sidna al-Meduni. The conclusion? Okay. I'll tell you what, we have plenty of time just, to discuss all these later on. I think, voilà, in Abderrahmane's Occipital Meduni, history is channeled through two different voices. The first one is factual history, where the village becomes an arena, a microspace at once of local, national, and global historical events and interactions. Something of a glocal site, a microcosm organically intermeshed with the macrocosm, so to speak. The second voice, I think, is rather more aesthetic, mythopoetic, almost romanticized, as if the author wants to soften and even heal these historical wounds and traumas. So the novel's merit, I think, is that it casts us as readers in the liminal space between the crudeness of historical violence and trauma and the softness and affability of collective memory and myth. We feel ourselves basically within that sort of liminal space, which is to the merit of the novel and the novelist. Okay, thank you. So I think I have to.
Thank you very much, Rached. So you have explained how complicated this relationship between the father and his son, and I think that the experience of an absent father is a very personal experience. So we can open the discussion. If you have any discussion, I can start for Heikel very briefly. So شكرا مرة أخرى هيكل.